Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello everyone. I am a Muslim and I want to talk to you about Islam. And more so, I want this video to be focused about explaining Islam, and not in a general sense, in a more specific sense, towards with regards to terrorism and hate and all that stuff. Um, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people have negative views on Islam, and there are many reasons for that. And oftentimes, it seems that we're not having a dialogue on these issues. A lot of people hear about, like, a lot of people who hate Islam will talk about why Islam is bad, why the Quran is bad, the Prophet is bad, all this negative stuff about Islam. While as a lot of people will defend Islam and only talk about the good, but no one will. The two sides don't address each other, and that can be frustrating for both sides. And that's why I want to make this video. I won't be touching on everything, obviously, but I wanted to talk about a few topics. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna focus more on the hatred side and the terrorism side. And a lot of people talk about these things when it regards to Islam, and I want to address these things. And I want to address the stuff mentioned in the Quran and the life about the Prophet, and explain it from a Muslim's point of view. These controversial topics that people don't seem to like explaining and trying to talk about. So that's what this video is about. So what we're gonna focus on are the recent controversies, regarding terrorism, ISIS, Al Qaeda, the terrorist attacks, and just the rise of Islamic radical terrorism, okay, and just radical Islam in general. We're gonna be talking about that and how that relates to Islam, or if it, why Islam probably isn't the main cause of all this. Okay, well, it's probably, and I'm gonna touch on that too. And also, I will put myself in your shoes and try to see things from your perspective. So this is not a video where I'm just gonna blanket and just hate on everyone who hates on Islam, because the fact is, like, in places like the US or the UK, Islam is like a tiny minority. It's like less than 5% of the population Muslims. So most likely the people who live there, where there's a lot of racism and hatred towards Muslims, they've never probably even met a Muslim, and all they've seen about Islam is probably what they've seen online, so, or on the TV. And if you see on the TV, especially a couple of years ago, it was all terrorism. It was just all terrorism, and regarding Islam. And it's you had, especially with the rise of ISIS, like, it's just again and again and again, and it's easy for people to think that maybe this religion is bad, and it's hard for people to see all that and still say it's good when they haven't met Muslims or they haven't done research on Islam on their own. And also, there's a lot of people online that just hate on Islam, and they just talk about all the negative things and all that stuff, saying, pointing out to verses in the Quran, saying this and that, all that stuff. So when they do try to research on their own, they see all this negative stuff, and they're like, oh, okay, I guess Islam is bad, I guess Muslims are crazy. So I think as Muslims we should, like, try to put ourselves in their shoes. It's not crazy for a person to hate on Islam and Muslims under these scenarios and in this atmosphere. And we shouldn't just hate them. We should try to, like, have a dialogue and answer their questions. And that's what I'm gonna do. So let's start with that. Okay, so let's start with the elephant in the room. Okay, terrorism, radical Islamic terrorism, and the rise of it. Okay, now I think a lot of people are saying, okay, I've never met Muslims and all that stuff, not in America, not in UK, not in all that stuff, but You look at countries where Islam is the majority, and it's just a disaster. It's just a war zone. The country is a mess. When you think of Islamic countries, you think, Iraq, Syria, Libya, and even countries that are not plagued by terrorism. You think of Saudi Arabia, and that, like, as far as terrorist attacks are concerned and terrorism and war is concerned, Saudi Arabia is not going through some major war right now. But when you think Saudi Arabia, you think, oh man, those crazy radical Sharia laws and this and that and all that stuff. And you still think, okay, that's like, Mecca and Medina that's like the capital of Islam, and look at that as an example. That's a bad example of Islam. I mean, like, it's just a bad country to live in. You don't want to live in Saudi Arabia because of all those laws and the Sharia laws. So we're going to address that. Okay, so we're going to talk about the geo-economic issues and how the religion is used as a tool to recruit and stir up trouble rather than being the main cause of, recruiting and stirring up trouble in the Middle East. Okay, so some of these countries I pointed out, we're going to put Saudi Arabia aside for a second. There's countries that have radical Islamic terrorism, okay, specifically. So that's why I'm putting Saudi Arabia aside. I'll get back to Saudi Arabia later. Those countries, you look at them, and it's the same exact story. It's the same exact story. And what you have is, you got a country that has a government, that has a leader, that has a military to protect itself and defend itself, and what you have is, you look at history. That country is relatively peaceful and fine. It's doing well until outside forces come in and take out that government and take out that leader and wipe out their military, and then just leave. Now, think about it, okay? You got Iraq, okay? Saddam was in power. Saddam was not a good guy, but he was in power. He had a strong military. He was killing terrorists. He was protecting his nation and this and that, okay? America comes in, okay? I'm not going to get into the reasons. I'm not going to, the oil, this. I put that aside, okay? We don't care about the reasons right now. We're just going to talk about the results, okay? America comes in. They take out Saddam. They take out the military, okay? And they put another puppet government in there, and a leader in there and all that stuff that no one wanted, okay? And they also caused a massive divide regarding Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims, whereas before there wasn't a major problem, in Iraq with Shia and Sunni Muslims. I mean, if you go back to the ancient times, I mean, like, right after the Prophet died, then there was a bit of an issue with Shia and Sunni Muslims, but things were relatively peaceful in Iraq regarding with Shias and Sunnis until, the US came in, took out all the Sunnis from power and put in Shias instead, and that caused a massive problem. So now you have, a country that's practically ruined, okay, economically, militarily, and everything, and all these people, and you got also hundreds of thousands of people died in the process. Hundreds of thousands of innocent people died. Do you expect people to not be angry? You have people who've lost their loved ones. They've lost their jobs. They've lost their country. They've lost their pride. They've lost everything. These young people, some people are stupid. They haven't gone to school. They haven't done anything. They've lost their family and all that stuff. What do they have? They're just angry. And there's a massive vacuum of power. So when you create an environment like that, it's the same thing with Libya also. Okay, you take out Gaddafi. Gaddafi gave his weapons and all that stuff. And then they take him out anyway. And then there's no backup plan. Like, seriously, they went in there, they took out Gaddafi, they took out the government, and then they had no plan after that. Everything fell to chaos. What do you expect? Okay, just imagine yourself. Let's say you're an American. Imagine this. The president was killed. The government was taken away. The military was taken away. Like, they somehow dismantled. Just imagine, hypothetical scenario. It's never going to happen, but imagine that. how would the country be? Chaos. Absolute chaos. Simple as that. Okay? And people are gonna be angry, and they're gonna be looking for some way of taking out that anger. And this is where terrorism comes into play. So bad people with evil intentions will take advantage. Okay, they will take advantage of this scenario, this situation, and they will use that to rally people, okay, behind a cause. Okay, and this cause, they'll claim, oh, it's, what do all these people have in common? You have to get something to rally behind. Okay, what do all these people have in common? They probably all hate the West, okay, the US, which came and wiped them out or screwed this over that all. I guess you gotta admit that the US has been involved in many of these, countries and their destabilization and everything. So they probably all hate the US. That's one thing they have in common. And they all happen to be Muslim. Not just regular average, oh, I believe in Islam, once in a while I go to the mosque on Sundays. No, like Muslims pray 5 times a day. They're very devout people, especially in these regions. So they're very passionate. They have a lot of hatred, and they're very passionately religious. It's easy to these people do is they simply use religion as a rallying call to further your own agenda and your own cause and everything. To okay, now I'm gonna get in power, I'm gonna declare war, this and all that stuff, and get into power using, and it's easy for me to recruit people because there's so many people, jobless people that are angry, and they're angry, and they're violent and this and that and everything. So you just gave them the perfect breeding ground for terrorism. Simple as that. Okay, and even the current president of the United States, Donald Trump, admitted that himself. He said that once you go into Iraq, they took off Saddam, they took out the military and all that stuff, and then they create this vacuum, and then ISIS comes in and easily takes everything. And that's true. ISIS was able to walk through half of Iraq easily because Iraq had like no good way of defending itself. And I don't know why, but like the U.S. decides to, rather than by stopping these terrorists and by arming militia groups. I mean, is that really a good idea? The West does that a lot. They arm random militia groups. You don't come on. What are the chances that those people are a bit radical, a bit violent, and I don't know, maybe a couple years from now they'll become the enemy? That's possible. Just look at the Taliban. The Taliban, we all agree, is a terrorist organization. Okay? Will you believe that they were once the allies of the United States? It's true. It's not. This is not a conspiracy. This is not this is not a conspiracy. This is something that's universally agreed by everyone. This is not like, it's just a fact. They were invited into the White House by Ronald Reagan because during that back then they were just arming and funding the Taliban to fight with the Soviets, and now look at the Taliban. You gave them a lot of power, weapons, and you trained them and all that stuff, and now they become your enemy, and now you got to fight them. And so you gotta realize that terrorism in these regions is present not because of Islam per se. It's more so that you've created an environment where you can that just breeds terrorism just naturally. Okay, it's gonna breed anarchy. It's gonna breed chaos. It's gonna breed a lot of jobless, angry young people that are very passionate, and they're gonna fight, and they're gonna. It's very simple. Like it's just human nature. Okay, you take Islam out, and you could put any other religion in there, and you would have the same results. Okay, and that's the same. You look at in Africa, in places like where Uganda, where they do have a relatively, in some African countries they have, obviously they have government and leaders and this and that, but it's relatively weak, and there's a lot of poverty there, in some regions, not in all regions, but there's some regions where there's just a lot of poverty, and you have this vacuum of power because, like I said, sometimes the government is a little too weak, and then you have groups like the LRA. Okay, the LRA is a Christian group. Okay, they are a Christian radical terrorist group. They're using child soldiers. They're using all this terrible. They're doing all these terrible things to people, and yeah, and they're Christians. Why? It's not because Christianity taught them to do this. No, it's because they use Christianity as a rallying call to get these people to come in and support. Because even terrorists, even gang members, even some bad people, when they do bad things, they want to believe that they're doing it for the right cause. They want to believe that they're doing something good and just, and that they want to be like martyrs in this world when they go out. Okay, so the best way to do that is to bring up religion or patriotism or something like that. So yeah, that's why you had the LRA, Lord's Resistance Army. They use Christianity because it just so happens that a lot of people in that region are Christians, so they'll use Christianity as a rallying call to get those people together and fight for some cause that's just completely opposite to the Christianity. And you know what? That's just a problem with religion in general. Okay, whether you wanna, whether you're an atheist or a religious person or whatever you believe, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, Jew, Christian, we can all agree that whether your religions or respective religions are true or not, okay, like, it's up to our interpretation in the end of the day. Okay, if God is out there and He sent out these prophets and gave books and laws to follow, but God is not going to come in to like correct us and fix us and this and that. He left us alone with it, relatively speaking. There's no more prophets out there anymore, and depending on what you believe in, so you're left alone with it, with your own interpretation, and in the end, it's easy to misinterpret stuff. Now, that's what we're going into next. So that explains a bit of the geo-economic and political issues in those regions and why you see a lot of radical terrorism in those countries. Now we look at... okay, I did say I would come to Saudi Arabia. So I'll get to Saudi Arabia. It's not that important. It's very simple. The country, it's relatively young. And early on, I believe in the 70s, what happened was like they were providing cheap oil to the US, and they became a close ally of the US, and the US would provide them with support against foreign threats. But what happened was the kingdom, or I should say the monarchy, there was out of the blue there was some radical religious group that went into the Mecca, and they declared that the monarchy is an enemy, and they've betrayed Islam, and they've sold the souls and this and that, and they're not living by Islamic code and this and that. And this was a very popular outcry, and people were like, yeah, they this is like they're not following Islamic traditions and this and that and all that stuff. And then the monarchy was like, oh shit, like if like the US can help us, they're like, oh crap, like if the US can help us from outside threats, but they can't help us with inside threats, and if this rebellion grows, if this like small anger towards the monarchy gets stronger and stronger, and it goes out into a full-blown rebellion, we can lose power. So they gave in, they caved, and they let the religious people take, just like, okay, you can do what you think is right, you can do this, and you can set the laws and this and that and all that stuff. And well, that led to the version of Sharia law that they're following today. And it's also important to note that right now, I believe Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, has gotten rid of a lot of those radical laws. He's gotten rid of the laws saying that women cannot drive. He's gotten rid of the male guardianship laws, and he's allowing for a lot more moderate versions of it. He's making it a lot more moderate, so we're seeing progress there. But as far as why Saudi Arabia was like that before, that's the reason. Some fundamentalist radical groups just sparked a outcry against him, and the government was the monarchy was relatively weak at the time, and they had to give in, and that's what happened. Again, when you have a weak government, this is the kind of stuff that happens. Okay, now the Saudi government is very strong, the Saudi monarchy is very strong, and Mohammed bin Salman is able to fight against this and everything. So we're seeing some progress there. Obviously, I'm not saying he's perfect. I know about the stuff in Yemen, but that's a different topic. Okay, we're just focusing on this. So that's why you have, a very radical version of Sharia law. And also, Sharia law itself, you have to understand, Sharia law is just Islamic law. Okay, that's, if you want to just break it down, simplify it, it's Islamic law. And it's Islamic law based on the Quran and the life and teachings of the Prophet and everything. But it's essentially Islamic law. And the problem with Sharia law, well, I don't want to say problem. No, the problem, okay, is that there's no official book of Sharia. Okay, you gotta remember this. The Quran is not the book of Sharia. Okay, because the Quran has a lot of things. Sharia is just rules. The Quran has rules. It's got stories. It's got lessons. It's got all these different things that have nothing to do with Sharia. It has nothing to do with laws. It's just wisdom or teachings, all that stuff. So sometimes you have laws in there, and again, it's left to your interpretation, and that's why there is no official book of Sharia. There's several hundreds of different versions of Sharia, which says a lot, because there's only one version of the Quran, okay, in Arabic. Okay, so there's different versions of Sharia, and none of them agree with each other. It's all up to your own thing. I mean, you got laws for example, one example, right? Some would argue that in Sharia, that if a woman or man commits adultery, they should be stoned. This was something that was in the Jewish scriptures. It was in the Christian religion. It was also in the Islamic. It's mentioned in the Islamic traditions as well. Okay, in the past. But here's the thing. And some countries do execute those laws and follow those laws. Okay, but here's the thing. Muslims are supposed to follow the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, and the previous prophets as well. Okay, because we believe that the prophets were messengers of God, and they were preaching the message of God, and we should follow their teachings as well, because it's the same as Prophet Muhammad's, peace be upon them all. And we also believe that Jesus was a prophet, not the Son of God. So we follow his teachings as well. Now, with Prophet Muhammad, there's no clear story where there was a case of adultery and he acted out those laws. He actually didn't. There was no case of that. However, there is a case like that with Jesus Christ, where there was, you all know the famous story, where there was a woman who committed adultery. And she was being stoned by the Jewish priests or some Jewish people. I don't know who exactly, right? And then Jesus comes and stops them. He stops them and says that, are you free of sin? If you commit a sin too, then you shouldn't have the right to judge this person and punish them or something like that. I'm sure Christians may know the story better. I hope I'm getting the loose sum of it. Okay, and he said, if you're not free from sin, you have no right to punish this woman. Okay, and act out a punishment like that. That is bold, because no one is free from sin. If that's the law, if that's what the divine law is, a punishment for that that act, like adultery, if no one is free from sin, then no one has the authority to enact that law. But here's the thing: there's in that scenario, there happened to be one human being or one person in the entire world that was free of sin in that time when Jesus met that woman and who committed adultery and all that. There was one person who was free of sin. And out of all the places on earth, that person just happened to be at that exact spot. That person was Jesus Christ. So he was the only one who had the moral authority to punish that woman. And what did he do? He forgave her. He didn't follow by that. Like he just forgave her. So like, if Sharia was supposed to be like if Sharia was supposed to be a legal system, this just creates a precedent where you can't enact that law at all. You just can't. So again, it's hard to implement Sharia in a legal system. It's easy to implement it in like a more personal way. Okay, laws of being a Muslim, praying 5 times a day, going to Hajj, fasting for Ramadan. I guess you can interpret those as Sharia, doing good deeds and this and that, But, it's hard to interpret it in a legal way, because especially, let's say you got rules on the internet. The internet didn't exist back in 1,400 years ago. So you're going to have to make up new laws. Can you make it up and call it Sharia and, call it divine law when it's not divine? It was made by you, a human. It's a bit complicated, so that's why you get different versions of it. I'm not saying Sharia is just all out bad. I'm just saying it's not universally good, and that's just obvious. It's complicated, as I should say. A lot of people get it wrong as far as implementing it. So now that we got the geopolitical side of it, the political side, and a bit of the legal aspects of Islam sort of explained and discussed, we're going to talk about we're going to talk about the Quran itself and the life of the Prophet Muhammad. Okay, I think this is the biggest one, where a lot of people that hate on Islam, they can look at terrorism and all that stuff, and they can understand the argument. They probably already know what I mentioned already, okay, regarding, why terrorism exists. It's not necessarily a universally an Islamic thing. Okay, you can use religion to cause anything. I mean, even the Crusades, it's an example where, they use Christianity to rally up all these people. Let's go to war, kill all these people and all that stuff for the sake of God, and you'll go to heaven if you die. Have you heard that before? What do you know? It's happened in other religions too. It's not the fault of the religion. It's not like, Jesus never said, oh, go out there and, go to war and conquer this land, that land, this and that. No, it was a Pope, who said that. And, Pope is very powerful in the religion of Christianity, especially in Catholicism, so he's got a lot of power. But you gotta realize that, like, God himself didn't give that law. It was another religious leader, a person that did. And it's complicated. In the end, the idea is that what I'm trying to get back to is like the point I made previously, where you can use religion to further your own political agenda, especially when it comes to war, by using as a rallying call to recruit and gain people and gain support for a certain cause. Because, especially when it involves violence, because if people are going to go into war or do all this stuff, they're going to want to feel like they're doing it for the right reasons. That's just universally accepted. That even just like joining the military, you're doing it because you're serving your country, you're serving your people, you're defending your land and this and that. I'm sure the Nazis said the same thing to their soldiers to get them to support join the army. Does that mean fighting for all those reasons are bad? No. Like, you want to defend your... I'm not upset. The Nazis are bad. Nazis are bad. Okay, but like the the idea of fighting to defend your land and everything, it's not bad, but it can be used to manipulate people to do bad things, you know. Like, I'm sure there were a lot of German people who joined because they wanted to defend the land. There were some kids and who were forced into join too late in the war. I had no idea what was going on to the Jews. Maybe they even hated Hitler, but they were forced to do it, or they felt like they had to protect the land because now Germany is being invaded too, and you know, it's like it's easy to use stuff like religion or patriotism or stuff like it's just general things like that to get people riled up and go to war and all that stuff. It's if you give them say that you're doing this for a good cause and you'll be a good hero and this and that, people will go out and do it, and bad people can manipulate that and use that to their advantage to spread their own evil agenda at times. So that's just the sad truth. I'm not saying that all people who join the military for those reasons are bad. That's just obviously, you know, majority of them are good. And I want to say that most people that fought for the sake of religion, historically, maybe you can call me naive, but I think that most of them had good reasons to do it. You know, maybe they did feel oppressed and all that stuff. And you know what? I think that's a good segue to the next problem: the history of Islam and the context that a lot of Muslims keep talking about when referring to violent or, you know, rather not so family friendly verses in the Quran. I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but so yeah, let's talk about that. A lot of people, well, like I said before, a lot of people will agree that maybe terrorism has other explanations, but they always say that no, they're following the actual laws of Islam because that's what's written in the Quran. That's the biggest argument that people use to make to say that Islam is bad, and that it's just inherently bad, and these terrorists it's not a result of just geopolitical and all that stuff. It's actually a result of Islam itself, because Islam itself teaches that. That's what the life of Prophet Muhammad was about. That's what the Quran was about. That's why it teaches in both those scenarios, right? And we're going to address that in this topic. That's the thing. A lot of Muslims, they don't mention this part. They don't mention it. They don't want to discuss it. So we're going to talk about that. So, the Quran. Now, I'm going to give a brief history of Islam and the brief context of the Quran. So, essentially, the Prophet Muhammad was born, and when he was roughly, when he grew old and everything, he got the first message by Angel Jibreel, or as Christians may know it as Angel Gabriel, that he was a prophet and his duty is to send the message to the people, and you get the idea, okay? And the Quran, keep in mind, the Prophet Muhammad wasn't illiterate. He didn't know how to write, he didn't know how to read, okay? He knew how to speak, but he didn't know how to read or write. So he didn't write it, okay? The Quran is, you know, it's supposed to be every single message that God told the Prophet through Angel Gabriel. Every single message God sent to the Prophet is all collected together, and that is what makes up the Quran. Okay, now in Christianity, the Bible, I believe it's the case where these other people, these priests or holy people, were inspired by God and the power of God and all that stuff to write the Bible. And I mean, I think it's I don't know about the Torah, but like it's stuff like that, right? But in the Quran, the context of the Quran and the origins, like the Quran, is that every single message that God sent to the Prophet through Gabriel, all of that collected together is the Quran. So the Quran has nothing in it that was written by other people or even the Prophet. It's not his own words, it's not anyone else's words, it's not added on from here and there. It's just a collection of everything that God told the Prophet. So that is very, very, very important to understand when reading and understanding the Quran. That is very, very important to know. Why? Because if God was to give the Prophet advice, that's in the Quran. Because everything he said to the Prophet is in the Quran. If God was to help the Prophet by telling him something, or giving him a warning or something, that's in the Quran. If God was to tell him a story to the Prophet, that's in the Quran. If God was teaching us something by telling it to the Prophet, that's in the Quran. Now here's the thing: if the Prophet was going through a certain struggle or going through something at that moment in history, at that moment, that time, specific time, and if God had something to say about it, that's in the Quran. Why this matters is that when reading the Quran, you really got to know the history of the Prophet and the historical context of each verse. That is very important. Now, we'll get to the history of Islam, and I'm going to briefly go through the life of the Prophet so you can better understand the context of the Quran, okay, especially when it comes to those violent verses. Now, initially, when the Prophet began preaching Islam, in the initial stages, Islam was a peaceful religion. You heard the term. Islam stands for peace. It stands for worshiping God. It's a peaceful religion. It's a religion of peace, right? And I would argue as a Muslim that's still true. It's a religion of peace, not a religion of pacifism. It's very important to know, because initially it said in the Quran, God hates the sword, God hates violence, God hates war and murder. If you kill one person, it's as if you killed all of humanity. If you save a person's life, it's as if you've saved all of humanity. That just shows the level to which how much God hates murder, and the level to which how much God loves saving someone's life in Islam. Okay, so even if you're a atheist that's just zoning out to say, oh, you think that the Prophet just made up, or it's just written by a man, even if you think that, it's still important to know this context, okay, because that's the context of the Quran as it is. So even if you believe that, oh, the Prophet wrote it himself, even though, like I said, he's an illiterate, you gotta understand it does. The Quran, the verses are specifically, related to the historical context of the Prophet's life. So even if you don't believe in Islam and the God, or like all these miracles and stuff, you still gotta know the context of the Quran when reading it and understanding it. So initially, God was saying you can't do any of that stuff. Okay, you can't go to violence. Now, I know that's changed. I know there's verses in the Quran that goes against it. Now, let me explain the story. So, initially, as the Prophet was preaching Islam and teaching them about Islam and everything, he was living in Mecca. He was having a small group of supporters. This became a problem to the Meccans. The Meccans, their main economic export was religion in a sense, but it was more so idol worshipping. In the Kaaba, they had all these idols, they had all these gods and this and that, and then they made their money on people coming to pilgrimage and going around Mecca and praying to all these idols and all these other gods and all that stuff, and that was their main source of income. That was how they made a big chunk of their money, okay, from people coming to worship their gods. So when you have a person preaching that all these gods are fake and there's only one God and he's unseen and these idols are, BS, that's a big hit to. That's not gonna go well with your whole economic structure. So like you can imagine, they were like, oh, this is a problem. Okay, Prophet Muhammad was universally loved by people before he was a prophet. He was respected by everyone. Okay, and these people, they respected him, but they're like, oh boy, you can't say that. That's going to cause some problems. You just can't. This is a problem. We gotta come to a settlement here. You can't just say that you can't that you can't worship all these idols and stuff, and that only worship one God. Like, no, that we make money off of this. You got to stop. You just got to stop. But he didn't stop. Okay, he kept on saying, no, there's only one God, and all of the gods, all these other idols and everything, those aren't real gods. They're just fake. They're just idols, and there's only one God, and he's unseen. And he's the only God that we're supposed to worship. The same God that Jesus preached about, the same God that Moses preached about, the same God that Adam preached about, the same God that all the prophets throughout history all preached about. There's only one, and he's the one that we worship. Okay? And there's no other God except him. And this was a problem. So initially they discredited him. They were yelling at the prophet, like the Meccans. Obviously he had some supporters, but the Quraysh, the Meccan leaders, like one of the tribes that were very empowered, in charge of the Kaaba, they were, in slandering the prophet, calling him all these negative things to discredit people from following him. But that didn't work. People kept more and more. Kept gaining more and more followers. Then they thought, okay, we're gonna have to use some force. Then they started torturing the Muslims and beating them, boycotting them, and hurting them. And still, God kept telling the Muslims through the Prophet that God hates the sword, God hates violence, you gotta be peaceful, you can't fight back, and you can't do all that stuff. This was a problem, okay? So what the Prophet did was he had to send the Muslims out to some of the weaker Muslims out to Abyssinia, the poor weak Muslims, because they were targeting them. They're the easiest to target. They were sending them to Abyssinia, and which was ruled by a Christian king, and said that he's a Christian. They had similar beliefs and similar religion to us. They'll protect you. And sure enough, the Quraysh tried to get those Muslims too, and get them back too. But thankfully, the Christian king, protected the Muslims, and he liked the religion and how similar it is to Christianity, and so he protected the Muslims. Again, Muslims couldn't fight back, and this got worse. Then they decided to throw away all the Muslims, to gather them all up and throw them out of the city and make them live in the desert. Okay? And that's what happened. Okay? They kicked out all the Muslims. They boycotted all their stores, all their, all their businesses they boycotted, and they kicked them out. They weren't able to take anything. They sent the armed forces and just grabbed them and threw them out with only the clothes on their backs. They couldn't even take their belongings or anything like that. They were just kicked out instantly. Okay? And still, the Quran was saying, you got to be peaceful. You got to be, you can't fight. War is bad and this and that. So just put yourself in the shoes of the Muslims at the time. They're going through hell right now just for worshipping their religion and all that stuff. Okay? And they can't fight back. Still. Okay, they've lost all their property, they've lost all their livelihood, they have no food, they're living in the desert, they're miserable. And you gotta put yourself in the Prophet's shoes too. Like, he had no protection. His uncle, who was one of the leaders of Quraysh, who was a good man, he was actually a Catholic, right? Who was a good man, who was like a father to the Prophet. The Prophet loved him, and he loved the Prophet. He was the only one protecting the Prophet, and he died. And the Prophet's wife also died, Khadija, who was the first Muslim, okay, a woman who was the first Muslim. She was a wealthy person too, so she had a bit of, she was able to give him some financial support too. He lost all of that, okay, and the Muslims they had nothing. Back then the Muslims would go to the Prophet, say, they're poor, and I think they'll ask for food, he'll give them food. Now he has nothing to provide, and he was forced to live in the desert. And then the people from a city called Yathrib, which was later changed to Medina, heard about this Prophet and said, we're going through a lot of troubles in our own city. If you're a Prophet, can you come to our city and rule over it and, protect us and be our leader and secure peace, and we'll join your religion and just help us. And they invited the Muslims over, okay? So the Muslims went over, and then the Prophet was ruling over a city. Okay? So now so that was a bigger problem to the Quraysh, because now he's got authority and this and that. So how are they gonna what are they gonna do? And then they decided that, okay, all these Muslims were kicked out. They left all their stuff here. We didn't even let them take any of their belongings. What the Quraysh did was they took all of the Muslims' belongings, all their property, all their clothes, all their toys, all their jewelry, everything they had, stripped their houses clean, put him on the caravan. Caravan is like it's like a caravan. If you don't know, it's like camels and all that stuff with goods and everything sent out to be traded. It's essentially like trading and importing and all that stuff were done through caravans, okay, back then. So they took all the Muslims' belongings and put it to the caravan to be sold, and the money would go to the Quraysh. Put yourself in the shoes of the Muslims. Okay, you had people be tortured. And by the way, the torture, let me explain to you how gruesome the torture was to the Muslims, okay? Bilal, who was a slave to a Quraysh member who joined Islam, his master would beat him and whip him and whip him and whip him and drag him across the sand and the desert, and then place heavy boulders on top of him, forcing him to renounce Islam, leave Islam and go back to your previous religion and this and that. He would continuously refuse to go against Islam and renounce Islam. So he stayed a Muslim all throughout. And so the Prophet saved him by sending Abu Bakr to buy him off, one of his best friends, Abu Bakr, to buy Bilal from that slave owner and set Bilal free and let him live free. So they went through that kind of torture. There was also another case where the first murder of Islam, first Muslim to be murdered, was there was a poor family. There was a husband and wife and everything. They were both Muslim, and their son was also Muslim. They beat and what they did was they whipped the woman. They tied her up in like her hands and legs were all spread apart, and they tied her up and they whipped her and whipped her and whipped her, forcing her to leave Islam and try to go back to their old pagan religion. And she refused. She kept refusing to leave Islam. And so what they did was, while the son was also whipped and he was tied to a post, he was forced to watch this, also saying, you gotta leave Islam, you have to, okay? And he said, no, I won't leave Islam, I won't abandon this religion, I won't abandon God and go against God. And so they took a massive spike and shoved it through her private parts and killed her, and forced the son to watch all that. This is the kind of torture the Muslims went through. And even then, the Prophet and the Muslims kept telling them, you can't fight back. And then they get kicked out of the city with all their belongings. They weren't able to take anything. They were starving for like a year and a half or 2 years. And still the Prophet said, you can't fight back, you can't fight back, you gotta be peaceful, you gotta be peaceful. And now they're in Medina, they're their own city and all that stuff, and they get the news that the Quraysh has stolen every single thing that they left in Mecca, and they're selling it in the caravan. How would you feel if you were in the shoes of Muslims? To all the people who hate Islam, to all the people who, not all atheists hate Islam, but like the people who hate Islam and say that Islam is violent and Muslims are bad and all that. So how would you feel in that scenario if you were a Muslim in that scenario? How would you feel? Or at least how would you feel for those people? Like, they were so angry. They were begging the Prophet, please let us fight. Please let us get back our stuff. Let us get back our property. That's our property. That caravan is coming back now with money that was made by selling our property. That's our stuff. Please let us fight to get back our money. Let us go and attack the caravan at least, so we can get back our stuff. They were begging the Prophet. And so the verses came in the Quran. God said the verses that you're allowed to fight. and he gave the rules of fighting. He said that you're only allowed to kill those who have harmed you and this and that if you are forced to kill. If they surrender, you cannot harm them. If they're a prisoner, you have to feed them just as much as you eat. Okay, you're allowed to kill if they're going to kill you. You can't kill children. You can't kill women. You can't harm animals. You can't steal property. You can't do any of that stuff. So he made multiple laws. But yes, the laws were saying, oh, you can kill and all that stuff. That's where it came. But that's where you need to understand the context that these Muslims, like the verses were talking about the Quraysh. Now here's the thing: when the Quraysh found out that the Muslims were gathering up an army to fight again to take the caravan, the Quraysh sent a massive army against the Muslims, a much bigger army. It was like 3 times bigger and all that stuff, right? And again, more laws came in the Quran, more verses in the Quran came saying that you're allowed to kill the non-believers and all that stuff. Now here's the thing: when people talk about the verses saying, oh, you're allowed to kill the non-believers and this and that, they're saying that, oh, look what the Quran teaches about all non-believers, that all non-believers should be killed. That's what the Quran teaches. See, that's the problem. They completely ignore the context. The context is, when they were saying non-believers, it's talking about the Quraysh. Okay, they were non-believers, but it's not talking about all non-believers. It's not talking about all pagans and all Christians and all that stuff. In fact, like I said, the Prophet's uncle was a Catholic. Okay, and he loved his uncle so much. And the uncle loved him a lot too. And when the Muslims were in danger, the Prophet trusted a Christian king to protect the Muslims. So you really think that the Islam is teaching to murder all non-Muslims? No. Okay, and even as far as Jews are concerned, a lot of the Jews initially were supportive of the Prophet coming into Medina, and they helped him come to Medina, and they were supporting him too. Although later on, a faction of the Jews betrayed the Muslims and problems happened there. But like initially, a lot of Jews were supportive of the Prophet too, and there were many Jews who were supportive of the Prophet as well. Just a certain faction weren't, and there was another war there when they tried to kill the people of Medina and join the Quraysh and this and that, and then that was also there. So, but it does not say to kill all non-Muslims, even when it regards to pagans. Okay, if you look at chapter 9, the initial verse of chapter 9, there's a lot of verses talking about murder and this and that. Okay, that particular verse came when a lot of those verses came when what happened was, after years and years of fighting with the Quraysh, okay, the Quraysh realized that they were losing, and they said, okay, we want to cease fire. We're going to make an agreement, no more war, no more bloodshed. You and your allies, we won't harm, and you can't harm us and our allies. Okay, and the Prophet said, okay, and then they signed it. They made a pact, they made a treaty, that no more fighting for a couple of years. I believe it was 10 years. And then what happened was, the Quraysh and their allies broke the treaty. They ended up killing some of the Muslim allies while they were praying. And so when that happened, when the Prophet heard news of this, the verses came saying that you can't trust these people, these non-believers, these pagans, all that stuff. You gotta. This is war. They've killed us and everything, and you have to go and stop them and this and that, right? And also in there, you gotta realize it says that to the pagans, that I believe it's chapter 9 verse 4. Okay, I'll put it on the screen. Okay, it says specifically that the pagans who were loyal, who did not break their treaty, who did not harm many Muslims, and they kept their end of the bargain, don't harm them, don't attack them, don't hurt them, because they were righteous, and God loves righteous people. They're pagans, they worship idols and all that stuff, but because they kept their word, it says that God loves people who are righteous, even if they're pagans. That's a very powerful statement. I also further clarifies the context that these verses are specifically talking to specific individuals who have done some terrible, terrible things. Okay, if you want any more further proof as to what the Quran says about other people, I give you one verse. We talk about the pagans. Look at what it says about Jews and Christians and other believers. Okay, look at chapter 2, verse 62. I'll put it on the screen so you can read it. You read it and you tell me, if you are a person who say Islam preaches bad, it says to kill all these people and all that stuff, you tell me after reading that the Quran preaches that all, non-Muslims should be killed. Just try and tell me that. Like, how can you? You just can't. It clearly goes against that notion. So that's why, when understanding the broader context of Islam, you realize that, it's when you know the context, it's easier to understand why Islam, why the Quran has those verses, and also it helps you understand the Prophet's life. He was forced to become a general when all these wars were going on. He had to lead the Muslims too, so he was forced to become the general. He was the lawgiver. He was a judge. He was also a judge, and he was also, by many historians, considered the greatest lawgiver of all time, because they know that this is they understand the context. Obviously these are smart people, so they knew the context and they understood why he went to war. It wasn't for his own personal gain. It was, he lived a very modest life. He near the end of his life, he ruled practically all of Arabia, and yet he slept on like a mat. He slept on a tiny house. He didn't have jewelry or anything like that. He lived an extremely modest life, so much so that his one of his supporters, one of the Muslims, when he woke up, he used to he would sleep on a bed with lots of, it was a rough bed. It wasn't even a bed. It was like one of those like woven things and all that stuff. And he would see the marks on his back, on the Prophet's back, peace be upon him, and he would cry, saying that you are the Prophet, you rule all of Arabia and all that stuff. You should be sleeping on the biggest house, the best of the beds. Why are you sleeping in this, crappy bed where your back is all lined with marks and everything because of how uncomfortable it is and everything? He ate very little and all that stuff. So he wasn't out for personal gain, okay? And yes, unlike Jesus, okay, who was primarily a preacher, the Prophet was a lawgiver. He was a head of state. He was a general too, okay? But I'm giving you the context to his life, why he was all those things, so you understand his life and you understand the Quran, and you understand that just because you went to war doesn't make you some warmonger that was a bloodthirsty monster that some people would describe him as, okay? That's the broader context of Islam and the life of the Prophet and everything. And also, one last thing I want to add. When those verses came out in chapter 9, talking about, that you should kill those pagans that broke the laws, that broke the treaty and all that stuff, right? And you should go in and attack. Now, when they killed those Muslims, the treaty was over. It was back to war, right? Do you know what happened? What did the Prophet do to all those people that, the leaders of Quraysh and everything? So the Prophet gathered up the Muslims, went to Mecca, okay, with a massive army. It was like 10,000 people. At the time, that was a big force, right? The Meccans had no army to protect, no nothing. They couldn't even put up a fight. The Muslims just walked in the city. Just walked in and took over. You know what the Muslims did? You know what the Prophet did? He told the Muslims, don't kill anyone, don't harm anyone, don't steal anything, don't damage anything, don't hurt anyone right now. Just walk in there peacefully. And the Muslims went in there peacefully, and then they got the leaders of the Quraysh and gather them up. The ones who have killed all the Muslims, the one who led the wars against the Muslims, the one who persecuted and tortured the Muslims, ones who stole all the property of the Muslims in the caravan and all that stuff. When they gathered them all up and brought it in front of the Prophet, the leaders of the Quraysh were prepared to die. That they said, okay, this is how we go out. This is how we die. We lost. You know what the Prophet did? He forgave them. Simple as that. He forgave them. And you tell me, is that a vengeful person? Is that a bloodthirsty, warmonger that some people describe him as? It's not. Simple as that. He just wasn't that type of a person. Now I know there are many other accusations people make about the Prophet, and I'll touch on all of that too, but this video is long enough as it is, so I want to talk about the question, is Islam peaceful? And with regards to all these topics, and I know it's a long video, but I hope you guys can bear with me on this. And I'm just giving perspective from a Muslim standpoint. I'm not here to bash anyone or attack anyone, even if you do hate Islam and all these reasons. I want to live by I want to try and in this channel talk about Islam and discuss it in a manner that the Prophet did, where it was very peaceful, very caring, and even very understanding, and also very forgiving to those that were hateful towards Islam. And by the way, a lot of those people that the people that the Prophet ended up forgiving, they ended up becoming Muslims later. The leaders of Quraysh, the leaders of the enemies of Islam, ended up becoming Muslim later on. Can you believe that? Yeah, I think his name is Abu Sufyan, was it? Yeah, he was the leader of the Mecca at the time. He also became a Muslim too. So yeah, that's the end of this video, this discussion. I hope you all liked it. It was just, just to discuss Islam, and we'll obviously talk about other issues. There's plenty of, controversial things about Islam, and I'll make smaller videos. This is the first one, so it's a little long. It's like a bit of a podcast-ish type of video, but yeah, I hope you can bear with me, and maybe I'll make shorter videos later on. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope, and feel free to write anything you want in the comments. Give me your opinions, give me your criticisms from all sides, okay? And try to be a bit civil in the discussions, if that's even possible. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.